And what do you wish?" he said at last. "That what should be shall be," she answered. "The love of the elves of their land and their works is deeper than the deeps of the sea, and their regret is undying and cannot ever wholly be assuaged. Yet they will cast all away rather than submit to Sauron. For they know him now. For the fate of Lothlorien you are not answerable, but only for the doing of your own task. Yet I could wish, were it of any avail, that the One Ring had never been wrought, or had remained forever lost." "You are wise and fearless and fair, Lady Galadriel," said Frodo. "I will give you the One Ring, if you ask for it. It is too great a matter for me." Galadriel laughed with a sudden clear laugh. Wise the Lady Galadriel may be, yet here she has met her match in courtesy. Gently are you revenged for my testing of your heart at our first meeting. You begin to see with a keen eye. I do not deny that my heart has greatly desired to ask what you offer. For many long years I had pondered what I might do should the great ring come to my hands, and behold, it was brought within my grasp. The evil that was devised long ago works on in many ways, whether Sauron himself stands or falls. Would not that have been a noble deed to set to the credit of his ring, if I had taken it by force or fear from my guest? And now at last it comes. You will give me the ring freely. In place of a dark lord you will set up a queen, and I shall not be dark, but beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night, fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain, dreadful as the storm and the lightning, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair." She lifted up her hand, and from the ring that she wore she issued a great light that illuminated her alone, and left all else dark. She stood before Frodo, seeming now tall beyond measurement, and beautiful beyond enduring, terrible and worshipful. Then she let her hand fall, and the light faded, and suddenly she laughed again, and lo! She was shrunken. A slender elf woman, clad in simple white, whose gentle voice was soft and sad. "I pass the test," she said. "I will diminish, and go into the west, and remain Galadriel." They stood for a long time in silence. At length the lady spoke again. "Let us return," she said. "In the morning you must depart, for now we have chosen, and the tides of fate are flowing." "I would ask one thing before we go," said Frodo. "A thing which I often meant to ask Gandalf in Rivendell. I am permitted to wear the One Ring. Why cannot I see all the others and know the thoughts of those that wear them?" "You have not tried," she said. "Only thrice have you set the ring upon your finger since you knew what you possessed. Do not try. It would destroy you. Did not Gandalf tell you that the rings give power according to the measure of each possessor? Before you could use that power you would need to become far stronger, and to train your will to the domination of others. Yet even so, as the ring-bearer, and as one that has borne it on finger, and seen that which is hidden, your sight has grown keener. You have perceived my thought more clearly than many that are accounted wise. You saw the eye of him that holds the 7 and the 9. And did you not see and recognize the ring upon my finger?" "Did you see my ring?" she asked, turning to Sam. "No, lady," he answered. "To tell you the truth, I wondered what you were talking about. I saw a star through your fingers, but if you'll pardon my speaking out, I think my master was right. I wish you'd take his ring. You'd put things to rights. You'd stop them digging up the gaffer and turning him adrift. You'd make some folk pay for their dirty work." "I would," she said. "That is how it would begin. But it would not stop with that. Alas! We will not speak more of it. Let us go." That night the company was again summoned to the chamber of Celeborn, and there the lord and lady greeted them with fair words. At length Celeborn spoke of their departure. Now is the time.
he said. "When those who wish to continue the quest must harden their hearts to leave this land. Those who no longer wish to go forward may remain here for a while, but whether they stay or go, none can be sure of peace. For here we are come now to the edge of doom. Here the ways of the world lie open again, or we summon them to the last need of Lorien. Then they may return to their own lands, or else go to the long home of those that fall in battle." There was a silence. "They all resolve to go forward," said Galadriel, looking in their eyes. Said Boromir. "That is true," said Celeborn. "But is all this company going with you to Minas Tirith?" "We have not decided our course," said Aragorn. "Beyond Lothlorien I do not know what Gandalf intended to do. Indeed, I do not think that even he had any clear purpose." "Maybe not," said Celeborn. "Yet when you leave this land you can no longer forget the Great River. As some of you know well, it cannot be crossed by travelers with baggage between Lorien and Gondor, save by boat. And are not the bridges of Osgiliath broken down and all the landings held now by the enemy? On which side will you journey? The way to Minas Tirith lies upon this side, upon the west, but the straight road of the quest lies east of the river, upon the darker shore. Which shore will you take?" answered Boromir. "But I am not the leader of the company." The others said nothing, and Aragorn looked doubtful and troubled. "I see that you do not yet know what to do," said Celeborn. "It is not my part to choose for you, but I will help you as I may. There are some among you who can handle boats. Legolas's folk know the swift forest river, and Boromir of Gondor and Aragorn the traveller." Cried Merry. "That is well," said Celeborn. "Then I will furnish your company with boats. They must be small and light, for if you go far by water, there are places where you will be forced to carry them. You will come to the rapids of Sarn Gebir, and maybe at last to the great falls of Rauros, where the river thunders down from Nen Hithel. And there are other perils. They will not give you counsel. In the end you must leave them and the river, and turn west or east." Aragorn thanked Celeborn many times. The gift of boats comforted him much, not least because there would now be no need to decide his course for some days. The others, too, looked more hopeful. Whatever perils lay ahead, it seemed better to float down the broadside of Anduin to meet them than to plod forward with bent backs. Only Sam was doubtful. He at any rate still thought boats as bad as wild horses, or worse. And not all the dangers that he had survived made him think better of them. "All shall be prepared for you and await you at the haven before noon tomorrow," said Celeborn. "I will send my people to you in the morning to help you make ready for the journey. Now we will wish you all a fair night and untroubled sleep." "Good night, friends," said Galadriel. "Sleep in peace. Do not trouble your hearts overmuch with thought of the road tonight. Maybe the paths that you each shall tread are already laid before your feet, though you do not see them. Good night." The company now took their leave and returned to their pavilion. Legolas went with them, for this was to be their last night in Lothlorien, and in spite of the words of Galadriel, they wished to take counsel together. For a long time they debated what they should do, and how it would be best to attempt the fulfilling of their purpose with the ring. But they came to no decision. It was plain that most of them desired to go first to Minas Tirith, and to escape at least for a while from the terror of the enemy. They would have been willing to follow a leader over the river and into the shadow of Mordor, but Frodo spoke no word, and Aragorn was still divided in his mind. His own plan, while Gandalf remained with them, had been to go with Boromir, and with his sword help to deliver Gondor. For he believed that the message of the dreams was a summons, and that the hour had come at last when the heir of Elendil should come forth and strive with Sauron for the mastery. But in Moria the burden of Gandalf had been laid on him, and he knew that he could not now forsake the ring, if Frodo refused in the end to go with Boromir. And yet what help could he or any of the company give to Frodo, save to walk blindly with him into the darkness? "I shall go to Minas Tirith, alone if need be, for it is my duty," said Boromir, and after that he was silent for a while, sitting with his eyes fixed on Frodo, as if he was trying to read the halfling's thoughts. At length he spoke again, softly, as if he was debating with himself. "And if you wish only to destroy the ring," he said, "then there is little use in war and weapons, and the men of Minas Tirith cannot help. But if you wish to destroy the armed might of the Dark Lord, then it is folly to go without force into his domain, and folly to throw away—" He paused suddenly, as if he had become aware that he was speaking his thoughts aloud. "It would be folly to throw lives away, I mean. It is a choice between defending a strong place and walking openly into the arms of death. At least, that is how I see it." Frodo caught something new and strange in Boromir's glance as he looked hard at him. Plainly Boromir's thought was different from his final words. It would be folly to throw away what? The Ring of Power. He had said something like this at the council, but he had accepted the correction of Elrond. Frodo looked at Aragorn, but he seemed deep in his own thought, and made no sign that he had heeded Boromir's words. And so their debate ended. Merry and Pippin were already asleep, and Sam was nodding. The night was growing old. In the morning, as they were beginning to pack their slender goods, elves that could speak their tongue came to them and brought them many gifts of food and clothing for the journey. The food was mostly in the form of very thin cakes made of meal that was baked a light brown from the outside, and inside was the color of cream. Gimli took up one of the cakes and looked at it with doubtful eye. "Cram," he said under his breath, as he broke off a crisp corner and nibbled at it. His expression quickly changed, and he ate the rest of the cake with relish.
No more, no more,
cried the elves, laughing.
enough already for a long day's march.
I thought this was only a kind of crab, such as the Dale men make for journeys in the wild," said the dwarf.
So it is.
They answered.
And it is more strengthening than any food made by men, and it is more pleasant than cram, by all accounts.
"Indeed it is,"
said Gimli.
"Why, it is better than the honey cakes of the Beornings, and that is great praise, for the Beornings are the best bakers that I know of, but they are none too willing to deal out their cakes to travellers in these days. You are kindly hosts."
All the same, we bid you spare the food.
They said.
Eat a little at a time and only at need, for these things are given to serve you when all else fails. The cakes will keep sweet for many, many days, if they are unbroken and left in their leaf wrappings as we have brought them. One will keep a traveller on his feet for a day of long labour, even if he be one of the tall men of Minas Tirith.
The elves next unwrapped and gave to each of the company the clothes that they brought. For each they had provided a hood and cloak, made according to his size, of the light but warm silken stuff that the Galadrim wove. It was hard to say of what colour they were. Twilight under the trees they seemed to be, and yet if they were moved or set in another light, they were green as the shadowed leaves, or brown as fallow fields by night, dusk silver as water under the stars. Each cloak was fastened above the neck with a brooch like a green leaf veined with silver. Asked Pippin, looking at them with wonder.
I do not know what you mean by that,
answered the leader of the elves.
They are fair garments, and the web is good, for it was made in this land. They are elvish robes, certainly, if that is what you mean. Leaf and branch, water and stone, they are the hue and beauty of all these things under the twilight of Lorien that we love. For we put the thought of all that we love into all that we make. Yet they are garments, not armour, and they will not turn shaft or blade. But they should serve you well. They are light to wear, and warm enough or cool enough at need, and you will find them a great aid in keeping out the sight of unfriendly eyes, whether you walk among the stones or the trees. You are indeed high in the favour of the lady, for she herself and her maidens wove this stuff, and never before have we clad strangers in the garb of our own people." After their morning meal, the company said farewell to the lawn by the fountain. Their hearts were heavy, for it was a fair place, and it had become like home to them, though they could not count the days and nights that they had passed there. As they stood for a moment looking at the white water in the sunlight, Haldir came walking towards them over the green grass of the glade. Frodo greeted him with delight. "I have returned from the northern fences," said the elf, "and I am sent now to be your guide again. The Dimril Dale is full of vapour and clouds of smoke, and the mountains are troubled. There are noises in the deeps of the earth. If any of you had thought of returning northwards to your homes, you would not have been able to pass that way. But come, your path now goes south." As they walked through Caras Galadhon, the green ways were empty, but in the trees above them many voices were murmuring and singing. They themselves went silently. At last Haldir led them down the southward slopes of the hill, and they came again to the great gate hung with lamps, and to the white bridge. And so they passed out and left the city of the elves. Then they turned away from the paved road and took a path that went off into a deep thicket of malon trees, and passed on, winding through rolling woodlands of silver shadow, leading them ever down, southwards and eastwards, towards the shores of the river. They had gone some 10 miles, and noon was at hand when they came on a high green wall. Passing through an opening, they came suddenly out of the trees. Before them lay a long lawn of shining grass, studded with golden Eleanor that glinted in the sun. The lawn ran out into a narrow tongue between bright margins. On the right and west the Silverlode flowed glittering. On the left and east of the great river rolled its broad waters, deep and dark. On the further shores the woodlands still marched on southwards, as far as the eye could see. But all the banks were bleak and bare. No malon lifted its gold-hung boughs beyond the land of Lorien. On the bank of the Silverlode, at some distance up from the meeting of the streams, there was a height of white stones and white wood. By it were moored many boats and barges. Some were brightly painted and shone with silver and gold and green, but most were either white or grey. 3 small grey boats had been made ready for the travellers, and in these the elves stowed their goods, and they added also coils of rope, 3 to each boat. Slender they looked, but strong, silken to the touch, grey of hue like the elven cloaks.
"What are these?"
asked Sam, handling one that lay upon the greensward.
"Ropes indeed,"
answered an elf from the boats.
"Never travel far without rope, and one that is long and strong and light. Such are these. They may be a help in many needs."
"You don't need to tell me that,"
said Sam.
"I came without any, and I've been worried ever since. But I was wondering what these were made of, knowing a bit about rope making. It's in the family, as you might say."
"They are made of heathline,"
said the elf.
"but there is no time now to instruct you in the art of their making. Had we known that this craft delighted you, we would have taught you much. But now, alas, unless you should at some time return hither, you must be content with our gift. May it serve you well."
"Come," said Haldir. "All is now ready for you. Enter the boats, but take care at first." Said the other elves,
"These boats are light built, and they are crafty and unlike the boats of other folk. They will not sink, lay them as you will, but they are wayward if mishandled. It would be wise if you accustomed yourself to stepping in and out, here where there is landing place, before you set off downstream."
The company was arranged this way. Aragorn, Frodo, and Sam were in one boat, Boromir, Merry, and Pippin in another, and in the third were Legolas and Gimli, who had now become fast friends. In this last boat most of the goods and packs were stowed. The boats were moved and steered with short-handled paddles that had broad leaf-shaped blades. When all was ready, Aragorn led them on a trial up the Silverlode. The current was swift, and they went forward slowly. Sam sat in the bows, clutching the sides and looking back wistfully to the shore. The sunlight glittering on the water dazzled his eyes. As they passed beyond the green field of the Tongue, the trees drew down into the river's brink. Here and there golden leaves tossed and floated onto the rippling stream. The air was very bright and still, and there was a silence, except for the high, distant song of larks. They turned a sharp bend in the river, and there, sailing proudly down the stream towards them, they saw a swan of great size. The water rippled on either side of the white breast beneath its curving neck. Its beak shone like burnished gold, and its eyes glinted like jets set in yellow stones. Its huge white wings were half lifted. A music came down the river as it drew nearer, and suddenly they perceived that it was a ship, wrought and carved with elven skill in the likeness of a bird. 2 elves clad in white steered it with black paddles. In the midst of the vessel sat Celeborn, and behind him stood Galadriel, tall and white. A circlet of golden flowers was in her hair, and in her hand she held a harp, and she sang. Sad and sweet was the sound of her voice, in the cool, clean air. I sang of leaves, leaves of gold, and leaves of gold there grew. Of wind I sang, a wind there came and in the branches blew. Beyond the sun, beyond the moon, the foam was on the sea, and by the strand of Ilmarinen there grew a golden tree. Beneath the stars of Ever-Eve, in Eldamar it shone, in Eldamar besides the walls of Elven Tirion. There long the golden leaves have grown upon the branching years, while here beyond the sundering seas now fall the elven tears. O Lorien, the winter comes, the bare and leafless day. The leaves are falling in the stream, the river flows away. O Lorien, too long I have dwelt upon this hither shore, and in a fading crown have twined the golden Eleanor. But if of ships I now should sing, what ship would come to me? What ship would bear me ever back across so wide a sea? Aragorn stayed his boat as the swan ship drew alongside. The lady ended her song and greeted them. "We have come to bid our last farewell," she said, "and to speed you with blessings from our land." "Though you have been our guests," said Celeborn, "you have not yet eaten with us, and we bid you, therefore, here between the flowing waters that will bear you far from Lorien." The swan passed on slowly to the height, and they turned their boats and followed it. There in the last end of Egladil upon the green grass the parting feast was held, but Frodo ate and drank little, heeding only the beauty of the lady and her voice. She seemed no longer perilous or terrible, nor filled with hidden power. Already she seemed to him, as of men of later days elves still at times are seen, present and yet remote, a living vision of what which has already been left far behind by the flowing streams of time. After they had eaten and drunk, sitting upon the grass, Celeborn spoke to them again of their journey, and lifting his hand he pointed south to the woods beyond the Tongue. "As you go down the water," he said, "you will find that the trees will fail, and you will come to a barren country. There the river flows in stony vales amid high moors, until at last, after many leagues, it comes to the tall island of the Tindrock, that we call Tol Brandir. There it casts its arms about the steep shores of the isle, and falls then with a great noise and smoke over the cataracts of Rauros, down into the Nindalf. The Wetwang, as it is called in your tongue. That is a wide region of sluggish fen when the stream becomes tortuous and much divided. There the Entwash flows in by many mouths of the forest of Fanghorn in the west. About that stream on the side of the great river lies Rohan. On the further side are the bleak hills of the Eminmuil. The wind blows from the east there, for they look out over the dead marshes and the no-man lands of Cirith Gorgor, and the black gates of Mordor. Boromir, and any that go with him seeking Minas Tirith, will do well to leave the great river above Rauros and cross the Entwash before it finds the marshes. Yet they should not go too far up that stream, nor risk becoming entangled in the forest of Fangorn. That is a strange land, and is now little known. But Boromir and Aragorn doubtless do not need this warning. "Indeed, we have heard of Fangorn in Minas Tirith," said Boromir. "But what I have heard seems to me for the most part of old wives' tales, such as we tell to our children."
All that lies north of Rohan is now to us so far away that fancy can wander freely there.
Of old Fanghorn lay upon the borders of our realm,
But it is now many lives of men since any of us visited it, to prove or disprove the legends that came true, that have come down from distant years. I have myself been at times in Rohan, but I have never crossed it northwards. When I was sent out as a messenger, I passed through the gap by the skirts of the mountains, and crossed the Isen and the Grey Flood into Northerland. A long and wearisome journey. 400 leagues I reckoned it, and it took me many months, for I lost my horse at Tarbad, at the fording of the Grey Flood. After that journey and the road I have trodden with this company, I do not much doubt that I shall find a way through Rohan, and Fanghorn too, if need be. Then I need say no more, said Celeborn. But do not despise the Lord that has come down from distant years, for oft it may chance that old wives keep in memory word of things that once were needful for the wise to know. Now Galadriel rose from the grass, and taking a cup from one of her maidens, she filled it with white mead and gave it to Celeborn. Now is the time to drink the cup of farewell, she said. Drink, Lord of the Galadrim, and let not your heart be sad, though night must follow noon, and already our evening draweth nigh. Then she brought the cup to each of the company, and bade them drink and farewell. But when they had drunk, she commanded them to sit again on the grass, and chairs were set for her and for Celeborn. Her maidens stood silent about her, and a while she looked upon her guests. At last she spoke again. We have drunk the cup of parting, she said, and the shadows fall between us. Before you go, I've brought in my ship gifts, which the Lord and Lady of Galadrim now offer you in memory of Lothlorien. Then she called to each in turn. Here is the gift of Celeborn and Galadriel to the leader of your company, she said to Aragorn. And she gave him a sheath that had been made to fit his sword. It was overlaid with tracery of flowers and leaves wrought of silver and gold, and on it were set in elven runes formed of many gems the name Andúril, and the lineage of the sword. The blade that is drawn from this sheath shall not be stained or broken, even in defeat, she said. But is there aught else that you desire of me at our parting? For darkness will flow between us, and it may be that we shall not meet again, unless it be far hence upon a road that has no returning. And Aragorn answered, Lady, you know all my desire, and long held in keeping the only treasure that I seek. Yet it is not yours to give me, even if you would, and only through darkness shall I come to it. Yet maybe this will lighten your heart, said Galadriel, for it was left in my care to be given to you, should you pass through this land. Then she lifted from her lap a great stone of clear green, set in a silver brooch that was wrought in the likeness of an eagle with outspread wings. And as she held it up, the gem flashed like the sun shining through the leaves of spring. This stone I gave to Celebrian, my daughter, and she to hers, and now it comes to you as a token of hope. In this hour take the name that was foretold for you, Elessar, the elf stone of the house of Elendil. Then Aragorn took the stone and pinned the brooch upon his breast, and those who saw him wondered, for they had not marked before how tall and kingly he stood, and it seemed to them that many years of toil had fallen from his shoulders. For the gifts that you have given me I thank you, he said. O Lady of Lorien, of whom were sprung Celebrian and Arwen Evenstar, what praise could I say more? The lady bowed her head, and she turned then to Boromir, and to him she gave a belt of gold, and to Merry and Pippin she gave small silver belts, each with a clasp wrought like a golden flower. To Legolas she gave a bow such as the Galadrim use, longer and stouter than the bows of Mirkwood, and strung with a string of elf hair. With it went a quiver of arrows. For you, little gardener and lover of trees, she said to Sam, I have only a small gift. She put into his hands a little box of plain grey wood, unadorned save for a single silver rune upon the lid. Here is set G for Galadriel, she said, but also it may stand for garden in your tongue. In this box there is earth from my orchard, and such blessings as Galadriel has still to bestow is upon it. It will not keep you on your road, nor defend you against any peril, but if you keep it and see your home again at last, then perhaps it may reward you. Though you should find all barren and laid waste, there will be few gardens in Middle-earth that will bloom like your garden, if you sprinkle this earth bare. Then you may remember Galadriel, and catch a glimpse far off of Lorien, that you have seen only in our winter. For our spring and our summer are gone, and they will never be seen on earth again, save in memory. Sam went red to the ears and muttered something inaudible, as he clutched the box and bowed as well as he could. "And what gift for the dwarf? Ask of the elves," said Galadriel, turning to Gimli.
None, lady, answered Gimli. It is enough for me to have seen the Lady of the Galadriel, and to have heard her gentle words.
"Hear, all ye elves," she cried to those about her. "Let none say again that dwarves are grasping and ungracious. Yet surely, Gimli, son of Gloin, you desire something that I could give. Name it, I bid you. You shall not be the only guest without a gift."
There is nothing, Lady Galadriel, said Gimli, bowing low and stammering. Nothing, unless it is permitted to ask, nay, to name a single strand of your hair, which surpasseth the gold of the earth as the stars surpass the gems of the mine. I do not ask for such a gift. But you commanded me to name my desire.
The elves stirred and murmured with an astonishment, and Celeborn gazed at the dwarf in wonder. But the lady smiled. "It is said that the skill of the dwarves is in their hands rather than in their tongues," she said. "Yet that is not true of Gimli. For none have ever made to me a request so bold, and yet so courteous. And how shall I refuse, since I commanded him to speak? But tell me, what would you do with such a gift?"
Treasure it, lady, he answered, in memory of your words to me at our first meeting. And if ever I return to the smithies of my home, it shall be set in imperishable crystal, to be an heirloom of my house, and a pledge of goodwill between the mountain and the woods, until the end of days.
Then the lady unbraided one of her long tresses, and cut off 3 golden hairs, and laid them in Gimli's hand. "These words shall go with the gift," she said. "I do not foretell, for all foretelling is now in vain. On the one hand lies darkness, and on the other only hope. But if hope should not fail, then I say to you, Gimli, son of Gloin, that your hands shall flow with gold, and yet over you gold shall have no dominion. And you, ring-bearer," she said, turning to Frodo, "I come to you last, who are not last in my thoughts. For you I have prepared this." She held up a small crystal phial. It glittered as she moved it, and rays of white light sprang from her hand. "In this phial," she said, "is caught the light of Eärendil's star, set amid the waters of my fountain. It will shine still brighter when the night is about you. May it be a light to you in dark places, when all other lights go out. Remember Galadriel and her mirror." Frodo took the phial, and for a moment as it shone between them, he saw her again standing like a queen, great and beautiful, but no longer terrible. He bowed, but found no words to say. Now the lady arose, and Celeborn led them back to the Hithe. A yellow noon lay upon the green land of the Tongue, and the water glittered with silver. All at last was made ready. The company took their places in the boats as before, crying farewell. The elves of Lorien with long grey poles thrust them out into the flowing stream, and the rippling waters bore them slowly away. The travellers sat still without moving or speaking. On the green bank near to the very point of the Tongue, the Lady Galadriel stood alone and silent. As they passed her, they turned, and their eyes watched her slowly floating away from them. For so it seemed to them, Lorien was slipping backward, like a bright ship masted with enchanted trees sailing on to forgotten shores, while they sat helpless upon the margin of the grey and leafless world.
Even as they gazed, the silver load passed out into the currents of the great river, and their boats turned and began to speed southward. Soon the white form of the lady was small and distant. She shone like a window of glass upon a far hill in the westerning sun, or as a remote lake seen from a mountain, a crystal fallen in the lap of the land. Then it seemed to Frodo that she lifted her arms in a final farewell, and far but piercing clear on the following wind came the sound of her voice singing. But now she sang in the ancient tongue of the elves beyond the sea, and he did not understand the words. Fair was the music, but it did not comfort him. Yet, as is the way with elvish words, they remained graven in his memory, and long afterwards he interpreted them as well as he could. The language was that of the elven song, and spoke of things little known on Middle-earth. Ai lauriel lanter lassi surien, Jeni uio nottime vevraner alderon, Jeni velinte julderan varier mio romardi, lissemiro vureva, Andune pella vardo telumar nuluini, Jassen tintilariellini, O Mario arrientari lirien, Si mani julmaninen quantuva, Ansi tintale vardo oiolosseo, Vefagnar mariat elentari ortane, Ar irietir undulave lumbole, Ar sinda noriello caita morniei falmalinar imbemet, Ar hissie, tupa calacirio mirioiale, Si vanwana, Romelo vanwa valimar, Namarie, Nai hiruvalje valimar, Naelje hiruval, Namarie. Ah! Like gold fall the leaves in the wind, long years numberless, as the wings of the trees. The years have passed like swift draughts of sweet mead in softly holes beyond the west, beneath the blue vaults of Varda, where the stars tremble in the song of her voice, holy and queenly. Who now shall refill the cup for me? For now the kindler, Varda, the queen of the stars, from Mount Everwhite has uplifted her hands like clouds, and all paths are drowned deep in shadow, and out of a grey country darkness lies on the foaming waves between us. And mist covers the jewels of Kelasiria forever. Now lost, lost to those from the eastern is Valimar. Farewell. Maybe thou shalt find Valimar. Maybe even thou shalt find it. Farewell. Varda is the name of that lady whom the elves in these lands of exile name Elbereth. Suddenly the river swept around a bend, and the banks rose upon either side, and the light of Lorien was hidden. To that fair land Frodo never came again. The travellers now turned their faces to the journey. The sun was before them, and their eyes were dazzled, for all were filled with tears. Gimli wept openly.
I have looked last upon that which was fairest,
he said to Legolas, his companion.
Henceforward I will call nothing fair unless it be her gift.
He put his hand on his breast.
Tell me, Legolas, why did I come on this quest? Little did I know where the chief peril lay. Truly Elrond spoke, saying that he could not foresee what we might meet upon our road. Torment in the dark was the danger that I feared, and it did not hold me back. But I would not have come had I known the danger of light and joy. Now I have taken my worst wound in this party, even if I were to go this night straight to the Dark Lord. Alas for Gimli, son of Gloin.
Nay, said Legolas, alas for us all, and for all that walk the world in these after days, for such is the way of it, to find and lose, as it seems to those whose boat is on the running stream. But I count you blessed, Gimli, son of Gloin. By your loss you suffer on your own free will, and you might have chosen otherwise. But you have not forsaken your companions, and the least reward that you shall have is that the memory of Lothlorien shall remain ever clear and unstained in your heart, and shall neither fade nor grow stale.
Maybe, said Gimli, and I thank you for your words. True words, doubtless. Yet all such comfort is cold. Memory is not what the heart desires. That is only a mirror, be it clear as Kelid Zara. Or so says the heart of Gimli the dwarf. Elves may see things otherwise. Indeed, I have heard that from their memory is more like to the waking world than to a dream. not so for dwarves. But let us talk no more of it. Look to the boat. She is too low in the water with all this baggage, and the great river is swift. I do not wish to drown my grief in cold water.
He took up a paddle and steered towards the western bank, following Aragorn's boat ahead, which had already moved out of the middle stream. So the company went on their long way, down the wide hurrying waters, borne ever southwards. Bare woods stalked along either bank, and they could not see any glimpse of the lands behind. The breeze died away and the river flowed without a sound. No voice of bird broke the silence. The sun grew misty as the day grew old, until it gleamed in the pale sky like a high white pearl. Then it faded into the west, and dusk came early, followed by a grey and starless night. Far into the dark, quiet hours they floated on, guiding their boats under the overhanging shadows of the western woods. Great trees passed by like ghosts, thrusting their twisted, thirsty roots through the mist down into the water. It was dreary and cold. Frodo sat and listened to the faint lap and gurgle of the river fretting amongst the tree roots and the driftwood near the shore, until his head nodded, and he fell into an uneasy sleep. Frodo was roused by Sam. He found that he was lying, well wrapped, under tall grey-skinned trees in a quiet corner of the woodlands on the west bank of the great river, Anduin. He had slept the night away, and the grey morning was dim among the bare branches. Gimli was busy with a small fire near at hand. They started again, before the day was broad. Not that most of the company were eager to hurry southwards.
They were content that the decision, which they must make at latest when they came to Rauros and the Tindrock Isle, still lay some days ahead, and they let the river bear them on at its own pace, having no desire to hasten towards the perils that lay beyond.
Whichever course they took in the end, Aragorn led them drift with the stream as they wished, husbanding their strength against weariness to come. But he insisted that at least they should start early each day and journey far into the evening, for he felt in his heart that time was pressing, and he feared that the Dark Lord had not been idle while they lingered in Lorien. Nonetheless, they saw no sign of an enemy that day, nor the next. The dull grey hours passed without event. As the third day of their voyage wore on, the lands changed slowly. The trees thinned and then failed altogether.
On the eastern bank to their left they saw long, formless slopes stretching up and away towards the sky. Brown and withered they looked, as if fire had passed over them, leaving no living blade of green, an unfriendly waste without even a broken tree or a bold stone to relieve the emptiness. They had come to the brown lands that lay, vast and desolate, between southern Mirkwood and the hills of the Emyn Muil. What pestilence or war or evil deed of the enemy had so blasted all that region even Aragorn could not tell. Upon the west to their right the land was treeless also, but it was flat, and in many places green with wide plains of grass. On this side of the river they passed forests of great reeds, so tall that they shut out all view to the west, as the little boats went rustling by along their fluttering borders, their dark withered plumes bent and tossed in the light cold airs, hissing softly and sadly. Here and there through openings Frodo could catch sudden glimpses of rolling meads, and far beyond them hills in the sunset, and away on the edge of sight a dark line, where marched the southernmost ranks of the misty mountains.
There was no sign of living, moving things save birds. Of these there were many, small fowl whistling and piping in the reeds, but they were seldom seen. Once or twice the travellers heard the rush and whine of swan wings, and looking up they saw a great phalanx streaming along the sky.
"Swans!"
said Sam.
"And mighty big ones too!"
said Aragorn.
"And they are black swans."
How wide and empty and mournful all this country looks,
said Frodo.
I always imagined that as one journeyed south it got warmer and merrier, until winter was left behind forever.
But we have not journeyed far south yet,
answered Aragorn.
It is still winter, and we are far from the sea. Here the world is cold until the sudden spring, and we may yet have snow again. Far away down in the bay of Belfalos, to which Anduin runs, it is warm and merry, maybe, or would be, but for the enemy. But here we are not above 60 leagues, I guess, south of the South Farthing away in your shire, hundreds of longer miles yonder.
You are looking now southwest across the north plains of the Riddermark. Rohan, the land of the Horse Lords. Ere long we shall come to the mouth of the Limelight that runs down from Fangorn to join the great river. That is the north boundary of Rohan, and of old all that lay between Limelight and the White Mountains belonged to the Rohirrim. It is a rich and pleasant land, and its grass has no rival, but in these evil days, folk do not dwell by the river, or ride often to its shores. Anduin is wide, yet the orcs can shoot their arrows far across the stream, and of late, it is said, they have dared to cross the water and raid the herds and studs of Rohan.
Sam looked from bank to bank uneasily. The trees had seemed hostile before, as if they harbored secret eyes and lurking dangers. Now he wished that the trees were still there. He felt that the company was too naked, afloat in the little open boats in the midst of shelterless lands, and on a river that was the frontier of war. In the next day or two, as they went on, borne steadily southwards, this feeling of insecurity grew on all the company. For the whole day they took to their paddles and hastened forward. The banks slid by. Soon the river broadened and grew more shallow. Long stony beaches lay upon the east, and there were gravel shoals in the water, so that careful steering was needed. The brown lands rose into bleak wolds, over which flowed a chill air from the east. On the other side the meads had become rolling downs of withered grass amid the land of fen and tussock. Frodo shivered, thinking of the lawns and fountains, the clear sun and gentle rains of Lothlorien. There was little speech and no laughter in any of the boats. Each member of the company was busy with his own thoughts. The heart of Legolas was running under the stars of a summer night in some northern glade amid the beech woods. Gimli was fingering gold in his mind, and wondering if it were fit to be wrought into the housing of the lady's gift. Merry and Pippin in the middle boat were ill at ease, for Boromir sat muttering to himself, sometimes biting his nails, as if some restlessness or doubt consumed him, sometimes seizing a paddle and driving the boat close behind Aragorn's. Then Pippin, who sat in the bow looking back, caught a queer gleam in his eye as he peered forward, gazing at Frodo. Sam had long ago made up his mind that, though boats were maybe not as dangerous as he'd been brought up to believe, they were far more uncomfortable than even he had imagined. He was cramped and miserable, having nothing to do but stare at the winterlands crawling by and the grey water on either side of him. Even when the paddles were in use, they did not trust Sam with one. As dusk grew down on the fourth day, he was looking back over the bowed heads of Frodo and Aragorn and the following boats. He was drowsy and longed for camp and the feel of earth under his toes. Suddenly something caught his sight. At first he stared at it listlessly. Then he sat up and rubbed his eyes. But when he looked again he could not see it any more. That night they camped on a small eyot close to the western bank. Sam lay rolled in blankets beside Frodo.
I had a funny dream an hour or two before we stopped, Mr. Frodo,
He said.
Maybe it wasn't a dream. Funny it was anyway.
Well, what was it? Said Frodo, knowing that Sam would not settle down until he had told his tale, whatever it was. I haven't seen or thought of anything to make me smile since we left Lothlorien.
It wasn't funny that way, Mr. Frodo. It was queer. All wrong if it wasn't a dream. And you had best hear it. It was like this. I saw a log with eyes.
The log's all right, said Frodo. There are many in the river.
But leave out the eyes. 'Twas the eyes that made me sit up, so to speak. I saw what I took to be a log floating along in the half-light behind Gimli's boat, but I didn't give much heed to it. Then it seemed as if the log was slowly catching up. And that was peculiar, as you might say, seeing as we were all floating on the stream together. Just then I saw the eyes. Two pale sort of points, shiny like, on a hump at the near end of the log. What's more, it wasn't a log, for it had paddle feet, like a swan's almost, only they seemed bigger, and kept dipping in and out of the water. That's when I sat right up and rubbed my eyes. A shout, if it was still there when I had rubbed the drowse off out of my head. For the whatever it was coming along fast now and getting close behind Gimli. And whether those two lamps spotted me moving and staring, or whether I came to my senses, I don't know. When I looked again, it wasn't there. Yet I think I caught a glimpse, with the tail of my eye, as the saying is, something dark shooting under the shadow of the bank. I couldn't see no more eyes, though. I said to myself, dreaming again, Sam Gimji, I said. And I said no more just then. But I've been thinking since, and I'm not so sure. What do you make of it, Mr. Frodo?
I should make nothing of it but a log in the dusk and the sleep in your eyes, Sam, said Frodo. If this was the first time that those eyes had been seen. But it isn't. I saw them away back north before you reached Lorien. And I saw a strange creature with eyes climbing to the flat that night. Aldia saw it too. And do you remember the report of the elves that went after the Orc band?
Ah,
said Sam.
I do. And I remember more too. I don't like my thoughts, but thinking of one thing and another and Mr. Bilbo's stories and all, I fancy I could put a name on the creature. Had a guess. A nasty name. Gollum. Maybe?
Yes, that is what I feared for some time, said Frodo. Ever since the night on the flat. I suppose he was lurking in Moria, and picked up our trail then. But I hoped that our stay in Lorien would throw him off the scent again. The miserable creature must have been hiding in the woods by the Silverlode, watching us start off.
That's about it,
said Sam.
And we better be a bit more watchful ourselves, or we'll feel some nasty fingers around our necks one of these nights, if we ever wake up to feel anything. And that's what I was leading up to. No need to trouble Strider or the others tonight. I'll keep watch. And I can sleep tomorrow, being no more than luggage in a boat, as you might say.
I might, said Frodo, and I might say luggage with eyes. You shall watch, but only if you promise to wake me halfway towards the morning if nothing happens before then. In the dead hours, Frodo came out of a deep dark sleep to find Sam shaking him.
It's a shame to wake you,
whispered Sam.
but that's what you said. There's nothing to tell. Or not much. I thought I heard some soft splashing and a sniffing noise a while back. But you hear a lot of such queer sounds by a river at night.
He lay down and Frodo sat up, huddled in his blankets, and fought off his sleep. Minutes or hours passed slowly, and nothing happened. Frodo was just yielding to the temptation to lie down again when a dark shape, hardly visible, floated close to one of the moored boats. A long whitish hand could be dimly seen as it shot out and grabbed the gunwale. Two pale lamp-like eyes shone coldly as they peered inside, and then they lifted and gazed up at Frodo on the Ayat. They were not more than a yard or two away, and Frodo heard the soft hiss of intaken breath. He stood up, drawing Sting from his sheath, and faced the eyes. Immediately their light was shut off. There was another hiss and a splash, and the dark log shape shot away downstream into the night. Aragorn stirred in his sleep, turned over, and sat up. "Is it?" he whispered, springing up and coming to Frodo. "I felt something in my sleep. Why have you drawn your sword?" "Gollum," answered Frodo. "Or at least so I guess." "Ah," said Aragorn.
So you know about our little footpad, do you? He padded after us all through Moria and right down to Nimrodel. Since we took to boats, he has been lying on a log and paddling with his hands and feet. I've tried to catch him once or twice at night, but he is slyer than a fox and slippery as a fish. I hoped the river voyage would beat him, but he is too clever a waterman. We shall have to try going faster tomorrow. You lie down now, and I will keep watch for what is left of the night. I wish I could lay my hands on the wretch. We might make him useful. But if I cannot, we shall have to try and lose him. He is very dangerous. Quite apart from murder by night on his own account, he may put any enemy that is about on our track.
The night passed without Gollum showing so much as a shadow again. After that the company kept a sharp lookout, but they saw no more of Gollum, while the voyage lasted. If he was still following, he was very wary and cunning. At Aragorn's bidding they paddled now for long spells, and the banks went swiftly by. But they saw little of the country, for they journeyed mostly by night and twilight, resting by day and lying as hidden as the land allowed. In this way the time passed without even until the 7th day. The weather was still grey and overcast, with wind from the east, but as evening drew into the night, the sky away westward cleared, and pools of faint light, yellow and pale green, opened under the grey shores of cloud.
There, the white rind of the new moon could be seen glimmering in the remote lakes. Sam looked at it and puckered his brows. The next day the country on either side began to change rapidly. The banks began to rise and grow stony. Soon they were passing through a hilly rocky land, and so both shores there were steep slopes buried in deep brakes of thorn and slough, tangled with brambles and creepers. Behind them stood low crumbling cliffs and chimneys of grey weathered stone, dark with ivy. And beyond these again there rose high ridges crowned with wind-writhen firs. They were drawing near to the grey hill country of the Emin Muil, the southern march of Wilderland. There were many birds about the cliffs and the rock chimneys, and all day high in the air flocks of birds had been circling, black against the pale sky. As they lay in their camp that day, Aragorn watched the flights doubtfully, wondering if Gollum had been doing some mischief and the news of their voyage was now moving in the wilderness. Later, as the sun was setting, and the company was stirring and getting ready to start again, he descried a dark spot against the fading light. A great bird high and far off, now wheeling, now flying on slowly southwards.
What is that, Legolas?
He asked, pointing to the northern sky.
Is it as I think, an eagle?
Yes,
Said Legolas.
it is an eagle. A hunting eagle. I wonder what that forebodes. It is far from the mountains. We will not start until it is fully dark.
Said Aragorn. The 8th night of their journey came. It was silent and windless. The grey east wind had passed away. The thin crescent of the moon had fallen early into the pale sunset, but the sky was clear above. And though far away in the south there were great ranges of cloud that still shone faintly, in the west stars glinted bright. "Come," said Aragorn, "we will venture one more journey by night. We are coming to the reaches of the river that I do not know well, for I have never journeyed by water in these parts before, not even here at the rapids of San Gebir. But if I am right in my reckoning, those are still many miles ahead. Still, there are dangerous places even before we come there. Rocks and stony eyots in the stream. We must keep a sharp watch and not try to paddle swiftly." To Sam in the leading boat was given the task of watchman. He lay forward, peering into the gloom. The night grew dark, but the stars above seemed strangely bright, and there was a glimmer on the face of the river. It was close on midnight, and they had been drifting for some while, hardly using the paddles, when suddenly Sam cried out. Only a few yards ahead, dark shapes loomed up in the stream, and he heard the swirl of racing water. There was a swift current which swung left, towards the eastern shore, where the channel was clear. As they were swept aside, the travellers could see, now very close, the pale foam of the river lashing against sharp rocks that were thrust out far into the stream like a ridge of teeth. The boats were all huddled together. Shouted Boromir as his boat bumped into the leader.
We cannot dare to rabbits by night! No one can live in San Gebir and be at night! Back!
Cried Aragorn.
Turn if you can!
He drove his paddle into the water, trying to hold the boat and bring it round. He said to Frodo,
I did not know that he had come so far, and in those faster than I thought. San Gebir must be close at hand.
With great efforts they checked the boats and slowly brought them about. But at first they could make only small headway against the current, and all the time they were carried nearer and nearer to the east bank. Now dark and ominous it loomed up in the night.
All together! Paddle!
Shouted Boromir.
Paddle or we shall be driven down to the shoals!
Even as he spoke, Frodo felt the keel beneath him grate upon stone. At that moment there was a twang of bowstrings. Several arrows whistled over them, and some fell among them. One smote Frodo between the shoulders, and he lurched forward with a cry, letting go his paddle, but the arrow fell back, foiled by his hidden coat of mail. Another passed through Aragorn's hood, and a third stood fast in the gunwale of the second boat, close by Merry's hand. Sam thought he could glimpse black figures running to and fro upon the long single banks that lay under the eastern shore. They seemed very near. Said Legolas, falling into his own tongue. Cried Gimli.
Gollum's doing up!
Said Sam to Frodo.
Those two, The river seems set on taking us right into their arms.
They all leaned forward, straining at the paddles. Even Sam took a hand. Every moment they expected to feel the bite of black feathered arrows. Many whined overhead, or struck the water nearby. But there were no more hits. It was dark, but not too dark for the night eyes of orcs. And in the star glimmer they must have offered their cunning foes some mark. Unless it was that the grey cloaks of Lorien and the grey timber of the elf-wrought boats defeated the malice of the archers of Mordor. Stroke by stroke they laboured on.
In the darkness it was hard to be sure that they were indeed moving at all, but slowly the swirl of the water grew less, and the shadow of the eastern bank faded back into the night. At last, as far as they could judge, they had reached the middle of the stream again, and had driven their boats back some distance above the jutting rocks. Then, half-turning, they thrust them with all their strength towards the western shore. Under the shadow of bushes leading out over the water, they halted and drew breath.
Legolas laid down his paddle and took up the bow that he had brought from Lorien. Then he sprang ashore and climbed a few paces up the bank. Stringing the bow and fitting an arrow, he turned, peering back over the river into the darkness. Across the water there were shrill cries, but nothing could be seen. Frodo looked up at the elf standing tall above him, as he gazed into the night, seeking a mark to shoot at. His head was dark, crowned with sharp white stars that glittered in the black pools of the sky behind. But now, rising and sailing up from the south, the great clouds advanced, sending out dark outriders to the starry fields. A sudden dread fell on the company.
Bereth Gilfonia!
Sighed Legolas as he looked up. Even as he did so, a dark shape, like a cloud and yet not a cloud, for it moved far more swiftly, came out of the blackness in the south, and sped towards the company, blotting out all light as it approached. Soon it appeared as a great winged creature, blacker than the pits in the night. Fierce voices rose up to greet it from across the water. Frodo felt a sudden chill running through him, then clutching at his heart. There was a deadly cold, like the memory of an old wound. In his shoulder, he crouched down as if to hide. Suddenly, the great bow of Lorien sang. Shrill went the arrow from the elven string. Frodo looked up. Almost above him, the winged shape swerved. There was a harsh croaking scream as it fell out of the air, vanishing down into the gloom of the eastern shore. The sky was clean again. There was a tumult of many voices far away, cursing and wailing in the darkness, and then silence. Neither shaft nor cry came again from the east that night. After a while, Aragorn led the boats back upstream. They felt their way along the water's edge for some distance until they found a small, shallow bay. A few low trees grew there, close to the water, and behind them rose a steep rocky bank. Here the company decided to stay and await the dawn. It was useless to attempt to move further by night. They made no camp and lit no fire, but lay huddled in the boats, moored close together.
Praise be the bow of Galadriel, and the hand and eye of Legolas,
said Gimli as he munched a wafer of lembas.
That was a mighty shot in the dark, my friend.
But who can say what it hit?
Said Legolas.
I cannot,
Said Gimli.
but I am glad that the shadow came no nearer. I liked it not at all. Too much it reminded me of the shadow in Moria, the shadow of the Balrog.
He ended in a whisper.
It was not a Balrog.
Said Frodo, still shivering with the chill that had come upon him.
It was something colder. I think it was.
Then he paused and fell silent. Asked Boromir eagerly, leaning from his boat as if he was trying to catch a glimpse of Frodo's face.
I think... No. I will not say.
Answered Frodo.
Whatever it was, its fall has dismayed our enemies.
So it seems.
Said Aragorn.
Yet where they are, how many, and what they will do next, we do not know. This night we must all be sleepless. Dark hides us now, but what the day will show, who can tell? Have your weapons close to hand.
Sam sat tapping the hilt of his sword as he were counting on his fingers and looking up at the sky. He murmured,
Land, or it ought to be. But either it's out of its running, or I'm all wrong in my reckoning. You remember, Mr. Frodo, the moon was waning as we lay on the flat up in that tree. A week from the full, I reckon. And we'd been a week last night when up pops a new moon as thin as a nail paring. As if we had never stayed no time in the Elvish country. Well, I can remember 3 nights there for certain, and I seem to remember several more. But I would take my oath that it was never a whole month. Anyone would think that time did not count in there.
said Frodo. Legolas stirred in his boat.
Nay, time does not tarry ever,
He said,
but change and growth is not in all things and places alike. For the elves the world moves, and it moves both very swift and very slow. Swift because they themselves change little, and all else fleets by. It is a grief to them. Slow because they do not count the running years, not for themselves. The passing seasons are but ripples ever repeated in the long, long stream. Yet beneath the sun all things must wear to an end at last. But the wearing is slow in Lorien.
said Frodo.
The power of the lady is on it. Rich are the hours, though short they seem in Caras Galadhon. Like Galadriel wields the elven ring.
That should not have been said outside Lorien, not even to me.
said Aragorn.
Speak no more of it.
But so it is, Sam. In that land you lost your count. Their time flowed swiftly by us, as for the elves. The old moon passed, and a new moon waxed and waned in the world outside, while we tarried there. And yestereve a new moon came again. Winter is nearly gone. Time flows on to a spring of little hope.
The night passed silently. No voice or call was heard again across the water. The travellers huddled in their boats felt the changing of the weather.
The air grew warm and very still under the great moist clouds that had floated up from the south and the distant seas.
The rushing of the river over the rocks of the rapids seemed to grow louder and closer. The twigs of the trees above them began to drip. When the day came, the mood of the world about them had become soft and sad. Slowly the dawn grew to a pale light, diffused and shadowless. There was mist on the river, and white fog swathed the shore. The far bank could not be seen.
Oh, I can't abide fog.
Said Sam.
But this seems to be a lucky one. Now perhaps we can get away without those cursed goblins seeking us.
Perhaps so.
Said Aragorn.
It will be hard to find the path unless the fog lifts a little later on. And we must find the path if we are to pass the Sarn Gebir and come to the Emin Muil. Don't see why we should pass the rapids or follow the river any further, said Boromir. If the Emin
For us, then we can abandon these cockle boats and strike westward and southward until we come to the Entwash and cross into my own land.
We can if we are making for Minas Tirith,
Said Aragorn.
but that is not yet agreed. And such a course may be more perilous than it sounds. The Vale of Entwash is flat and fenny, and fog is a deadly peril there for those on foot and laden. I would not abandon our boats until we must. The river is at least a path that cannot be missed.
Objected Boromir.
And even if you pass the gates of Argonath and come unmolested to the Tindrock, what will you do then? Leap down the falls and land in the marshes? No,
Answered Aragorn.
say rather that we will bear our boats by the ancient way to Rauros foot, and there take to the water again. Do you not know, Boromir, or do you choose to forget the North Stair, and the high seat upon Amonhen that were made in the days of the great kings? I at least have a mind to stand in that high place again, before I decide my course. There maybe we shall see some sign that will guide us.
Boromir held out long against this choice, but when it became plain that Frodo would follow Aragorn wherever he went, he gave in.
It is not the way of the men of Minas Tirith to desert their friends at need,
He said.
and you will need my strength if ever you are to reach the Tindrock. To the Tall Isle I go, but no further. Then I shall turn to my home, alone, if my help has not earned the reward of any companionship.
The day was now growing, and the fog had lifted a little. It was decided that Aragorn and Legolas should at once go forward along the shore, while the others remained by the boats. Aragorn hoped to find some way in which they could carry both their boats and their luggage to the smoother water beyond the rapids.
Boats of the elves would not sink, maybe,
He said,
but that does not say that we should come through Sarngebir alive. None have ever done so yet. Though no road was made by the men of Gondor in this region, for even in their great days their realm did not reach up Anduin beyond the Emin Muil. But there is a portage way somewhere on the western shore, if I can find it. It cannot yet have perished, for light boats used to journey out of Wilderland down to Osgiliath, and still did so until a few years ago, when the orcs of Mordor began to multiply. Seldom in my life has any boat come out of the north, and the orcs prowl on the east shore. If you go forward, peril will grow with every mile, even if you find a path. Peril lies ahead on every southward road, answered Aragorn. Wait for us one day. If we do not return in that time, you will know that evil has indeed befallen us. Then you must take a new leader, and follow him as best you can. It was with a heavy heart that Frodo saw Aragorn and Legolas climb the steep bank and vanish into the mists. But his fears proved groundless. Only 2 or 3 hours had passed, and it was barely midday when the shadowy shapes of the explorers appeared again. Said Aragorn, as he clambered down the bank. There is a track, and it leads to a good landing that is still serviceable. The distance is not great. The head of the rapids is but half a mile below us, and they are little more than a mile long. Not far beyond them, the stream becomes clear and smooth again, though it runs swiftly. Our hardest task will be to get our boats and baggage to the old portage way. We have found it, but it lies well back from the waterside here, and runs under the lee of a rock wall, and a furlong or more from the shore. We did not find where the northward landing lies. If it still remains, we must have passed it yesterday night. We might labour far upstream and yet miss it in the fog. I fear we must leave the river now, and make for Portage Way as best we can from here. That would not be easy, even if we were all men, said Boromir. Yet such as we are, we will try it, said Aragorn.
Aye, we will,
Said Gimli.
The legs of men will lag on a rough road, while a dwarf goes on. Be the burden twice his own weight, Master Boromir.
The task proved hard indeed, yet in the end it was done. The goods were taken out of the boats and brought to the top of the bank, where there was a level space. Then the boats were drawn out of the water and carried up. They were far less heavy than any had expected. Of what tree growing in the elvish country they were made, not even Legolas knew, but the wood was tough and yet strangely light. Merry and Pippin alone could carry their boat with ease along the flat. Nonetheless, it needed the strength of the 2 men to lift and haul them over the ground that the company now had to cross. It sloped up away from the river, a tumbled waste of grey limestone boulders, with many hidden holes shrouded with weeds and brushes. There were thickets of brambles and sheer dells, and here and there boggy pools fed by waters trickling from the terraces further inland. One by one, Boromir and Aragorn carried the boats, while the others toiled and scrambled after them with the baggage. At last all was removed and laid on the portage way. Then, with little further hindrance save from sprawling briars and many fallen stones, they moved forward altogether. Fog still hung in veils upon the crumbling rock wall, and to their left mist shrouded the river. They could hear it rushing and foaming over the sharp shells and stony teeth of Sarngebir, but they could not see it. Twice they made the journey, before all was brought safe to the southern landing. There the portage way, turning back to waterside, ran gently down to the shallow edge of a little pool. It seemed to have been scooped in the riverside not by hand, but by the water swelling down from Sarngebir against a low pyre of rock that jutted out some way into the stream. Beyond it the shore rose sheer into a grey cliff, and there was no further passage for those on foot. Already the short afternoon was past, and a dim cloudy dusk was closing in. They sat beside the water listening to the confused rush and roar of the rapids hidden in the mist. They were tired and sleepy, and their hearts were as gloomy as the dying day.
Well, here we are, and here we must pass another night,
said Boromir.
We need sleep, and even if Aragorn had a mind to pass the gates of Argonath by night,
We are all too tired. Except, no doubt, our sturdy dwarf.
Gimli made no reply. He was nodding as he sat.
Let us rest as much as we can now, said Aragorn. Tomorrow we must journey by day again, unless the weather changes once more and cheats us. Seen by any eyes of the eastern shore. But tonight two must watch together in turns, 3 hours off and 1 on guard.
Nothing happened that night worse than a brief drizzle of rain an hour before dawn. As soon as it was fully light they started. Already the fog was thinning. They kept as close as they could to the western side, and they could see the dim shapes of the low cliffs rising ever higher, shadowy walls with their feet in the hurrying river. In the mid-morning the clouds drew down lower, and it began to rain heavily. They drew the skin covers over their boats to prevent them from being flooded, and drifted on. Little could be seen before them or about them, through the grey falling curtains. The rain, however, did not last long. Slowly the sky above grew lighter, and then suddenly the clouds broke, and their draggled fringes trailed away northward up the river.
The fogs and mists were gone. Before the travellers lay a wide ravine, with great rocky sides to which clung, upon shelves and in narrow crevices, a few thorn trees. The channel grew narrower, and the river swifter. Now they were speeding along with little hope of stopping or turning, whatever they might meet ahead. Over them was a lane of pale blue sky, around them the dark overshadowed river, and before them, black, shutting out the sun, the hills of Emimuil, in which no opening could be seen.
Frodo, peering forward, saw in the distance 2 great rocks approaching. Like great pinnacles or pillars of stone they seemed. Tall and sheer and ominous they stood upon either side of the stream. A narrow gap appeared between them, and the river swept the boat